He also writes, and this is perhaps his most influential legacy, a long series of polemical manifestos, broadsides aimed squarely at the various extreme destructive tendencies of his day. He knows them very well. He's rubbed shoulders with them in Baghdad, and he aims these books at them like a gun. And they are accepted by the ulama as, in every case, the most effective defense of traditional Sunni Islam against these extreme aberrant tendencies. One of these was a book which he called Tahafut al-Falasifa, which means the contradiction or the incoherence of the philosophers. By falasifa and falsafa, Islamic civilization does not mean philosophy as we would understand it today, but rather a developed philosophical system with specific propositions and methods that had been developed by the Arabs on the basis of an inherited synthesis between Neoplatonism and Aristotelianism that they found in the Near East when they conquered it. Ibn Sina, another great Central Asian scholar, who predated Imam Al-Ghazali by only a few years, had produced a series of very brilliant summations of this tradition in his Kitab al-Shifa, and also a shorter, more mystically inclined version of his philosophy in another book which he called Kitab al-Najat. And Ibn Sina's position was that really revelation is fine, but in order to keep the masses out of trouble, it is indeed from God, but God cannot disclose the real truths about himself to simple-minded peasants. Therefore, he reveals the scriptures in order to satisfy the limited minds of the masses, but the elite, the khawas, who have been given almost supernatural powers of intellection by God, have to work things out for themselves from first principles. And as if this wasn't enough, some of the conclusions that Ibn Sina was insisting on in the Kitab al-Shifa were clearly incompatible with even the most broad-minded understanding of Quranic doctrine. And Imam Al-Ghazali, aware of the dangers that intelligent young Muslims would be seduced away from the straight and narrow by this very sophisticated, attractive, rather beautiful cosmology, wrote a book in order to undermine it. And whereas previous ulama had done so simply by hurling the scriptures at Ibn Sina, to little effect, because Ibn Sina had his own view of the scriptures and the fact that intellection was effectively superior, Imam Al-Ghazali's approach was very novel amongst the ulama in that he sought to beat them at their own game. He mastered Ibn Sina's system, and in order to define it clearly as a target, he even summarized it in a book which he called Maqasid al-Falasifa, the intentions of the philosophers, which is a short one-volume summary of Ibn Sina's teaching, and a very fair-minded summary. In fact, so objective is it that some of the ulama objected that he was actually propagandizing for Ibn Sina by doing this. So effective and objective an approach was it that this work was duly translated into Latin and popularized Ghazali amongst medieval Latin Christian theologians, who assumed that he was following the standard philosophical line of Ibn Sina. In fact, this was just a target that Imam Al-Ghazali was setting up in order to knock it down with a truly powerful broadside which took the form of his great work Tahafut al-Falasifa, in which he doesn't hurl the scriptures at the philosophers. It would have had no avail. But he shows the internal contradictions of Ibn Sina's position, that it doesn't hold water even according to its own premises. The Tahafut is divided into 20 sections, each of which relates to one of the grave errors of Ibn Sina. And 3 of them Imam Al-Ghazali devotes particular attention to because he thinks that it's on these 3 issues that the philosophers are actually outside the bounds of Islam altogether. وَجَبَ تَكْفِيرُهُمْ. They have to be declared kafir. And these three issues are the philosophers' belief that the world has always existed, wasn't created, because God has always had generosity and willed there to be a creation. There can never have been a time when that will wasn't actualized. The second was the corollary, which is that the philosophers believed that the world was eternal and would never come to an end, hence no judgment. And the third was the philosophers' reluctance to believe that the perfect God could know all of the little things that happen in the world. This is known as ilmullah bil juz'iyat, God's knowledge of particulars. Philosophers thought that God in his perfect unity would be diminished and would be made less one if he, in his knowledge, had multiple knowledge of all the little things that happen in the here below. Imam Al-Ghazali shows how, on their own terms, the philosophers are simply talking nonsense. Now, because of Ghazali's own intelligence, his campaign actually succeeds, and there's only one significant Muslim philosopher after Imam al-Ghazali, who is Ibn Rushd in Cordoba, who responds to Ghazali, but in a rather wistful and oblique way, and his riposte really is not a particularly successful one. But Imam al-Ghazali's defeat of the philosophical danger in Islam, which had a parallel in Christianity, which eventually prevailed, because philosophy did finally break the chains of religion, if you like, and became the principal intellectual discourse of the West. But it never did that in the Islamic world, largely because Imam al-Ghazali had shown how it was possible to be a highly intelligent, sophisticated, inquiring person, and yet to remain within the framework of Islamic orthodoxy in terms of a very sophisticated, philosophized ilm al-kalam. That's just one of his achievements.